This is Transparency, a podcast by Gender Dysphoria Alliance, hosted by Aaron Kimberly and Aaron Terrell. Each week we'll be joined by people who have personal or professional experience with gender dysphoria and physical transition. We'll also discuss how our trans experiences relate to the concept of gender identity. Join us for a compassionate yet heterodox approach to the question of trans. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Transparency. We are joined today by Limpida. We connected with her via Twitter. She's got a really interesting experience of transition and kind of a personal experience with Autogynephilia, and has graciously agreed to come on and talk about her experience with that, with the community, with kind of life experiences that kind of led her to transition, and as well as to the understanding of Autogynephilia, where how that impacts her and kind of the wider transgender situation we are all in here. So thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me.
So where do you want to get started? Do you want to kind of tell about kind of your early upbringing, early experiences that you kind of feel like may have resulted in I think what you've referred to as kind of like an ego splintering that is kind of like a female self that you kind of which was really profound way to put it, kind of like have more compassion for this kind of this alter ego, or this splintered ego that was female over your actual male self. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So growing up, so I should also say, because it's very important to the whole narrative, I guess, is I have autism, and I'm very sensitive to like my environmental state. I mean, socially as well, and things were kind of difficult growing up. I was not in an environment that was like capable of handling the issues I was having with autism and my sort of weird staggered development. I was a really like bright kid, but I was not like socially developed really, and I was also like very uncoordinated and very like sensitive to things. So like I was bullied a lot as a kid, and my parents didn't really know how to handle it, and it kind of just kept happening until like high school-ish. But by the time I was in high school, like I was like not doing so well. And as a kid, like one of the things that I would do that was sort of self-soothing was like I would sort of like inhabit like a female sort of persona in my head. Like I would only allow myself to do certain things if I was like, if in my head I was a girl. And my parents didn't really know about this, and my grandparents didn't really know about this. I grew up with my grandparents as well, but they didn't really know about this. This was really just in my head. And even as a kid, like I thought that I was going to grow up to look like my mom and my grandma. I thought that once I like hit puberty, I would start to look more like a woman than I would like my father or my grandfather. And I didn't really have an explanation for this. And so like I get to high school, things are hard. Puberty is hitting me, and I'm like distressed because I don't know how to handle the changes. But also like I am very depressed and traumatized, and I have like serious like issues with like OCD. I have issues like relating to the people around me. I'm sort of addicted to the internet at like a pretty early age, like starting at like 11 or so. And I like at a certain point, like years pass, my symptoms deteriorate, and people around me are just sort of trying to ignore the fact that it's happening, except for a few people who are just enabling every bad decision that I make. By the time I was in college, in my like late teens, early 20s, at that point I had no I basically like I had come to the point where I hated all men, and all men included me for a time, until I was like, well, if I hate all men, then I don't want to be a man. And I sort of like stopped taking care of myself at all. um I wasn't able to handle the transition from high school to college whatsoever. I immediately fell apart. I fell into alcohol, like not full on alcoholism, but like I was abusing alcohol. I was abusing marijuana. I had a lot of friends who were like Xanax addicts and stuff. I'm lucky I didn't fall into any of that, but it was a bad time. And I could like the only thing that would get me up out of that funk kind of was if I started to inhabit that like soothing headspace again. Um and it it was like there was a sexual element to it, um because uh a lot of my early sexual experiences weren't all that great, and I was in a fairly toxic relationship. It was fairly mutually toxic, with a woman who it seems also like had sort of a thing for trans women, um, and herself like at one point wanted to transition as well. And so it was hard for me to feel any compassion for myself, because it felt sort of like there wasn't any for me as a man. um and basically as soon as I started to tell people in my life that I didn't feel like I was a man, that I was like, at first I said I was gender fluid, and then I said I was non-binary, and then finally settled on like, okay, I'm a trans woman. Like, friends were more accommodating of that at first, but also like the only like my parents were very not okay with any of this. At first they were concerned, but there were other issues involved too. um it was hard to find care at all, to deal with any of these issues, and I kind of just suffered with them. But the sexual aspect was more tied up in just that relationship, honestly. It was like that, like being with this person was like one of the only like bright spots in my life. um and so it had to be like, okay, well, if this person believes I'm a woman, and I believe that I'm trans, then clearly like something else is wrong in every other aspect of my life. And uh so late teens, early 20s, that was kind of when like my feminine persona had kind of just like subsumed everything else, and I started to really like destroy myself up until I was like, okay, well, if you transition, then you don't have to destroy yourself. And so I did that. I ended up transitioning, and it felt good at first, like the changes coming in and everything. um like it felt like it was really happening, and like I finally like stopped having like really obsessive like suicidal thoughts and stuff like that. But then like about a year into it, it just started to feel like something was wrong. Like the narrative that I had like come to believe was like not quite true. And even before then, I kind of felt like there was something wrong about like trans women or women. Like it felt like there was something missing from that. But I didn't really question it very much, because I couldn't at the time I couldn't really afford to, like cognitively. So yeah, that I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you were like much younger, like as a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old, how did you relate to your biological sex at that time?
I was so I one of my earliest memories, actually, like I was like 4 years old in preschool, and there was a girl that had like a Dora the Explorer backpack. And I said that I wanted to have the Dora the Explorer backpack because I really liked Dora the Explorer. And the guy at the store refused to sell it to my parents because he said that's for girls. And that stuck with me. I was very rigid about being a boy. Like I made that like my identity, like my whole identity for like publicly at least. Like I like literally there were several years where my favorite color was blue and my only rationale for it was that boys liked blue, so I had to like blue. It was a very like I'm a very literal thinker and very like rigid. So I was like pretty rigid about like identifying as a boy and whatever, except in these self-soothing instances. And like there were like flashes of like I would rather be a like my thinking was like I would be a boy as a child and then grow up to be a woman. Like that was sort of the belief that I had as a young kid. And over time, like I came to knew that that wasn't how things work, that like you're born a man and you stay a man. But there was just still something in the back of my head that was like, but I'm going to be a woman, right? Like I'm like that's how that's going to happen. It was very like not I had no reason for believing that, but that's what I believed.
In your romantic life, have you always dated natal females?
So far, yes. It's only recently that I've started trying to date males.
So that's been a recent development. Do you think that's as a result of transition, or do you think that might have unfolded regardless?
Well, there was some by curiosity. I can't say that I was like I didn't know how to like understand it though. I understand it now as meta attraction, which is like a more descriptive way of explaining pseudo bisexuality, as Blanchard puts it, which is basically like I'm attracted to men on the basis that they find me attractive as a woman. But and there was like an inkling of that while I was growing up too. Like I wanted to like I always tried to do stuff to impress the boys, but do stuff that was only impressive if I was a girl. But I didn't understand that that's what I was doing. But like in terms of like what my base sexual orientation is, like I've always been more interested in girls. But the trying to be with a man thing is more because I transitioned, I think, is because it like the transition happened kind of fast, and it like I already had like I was already kind of androgynous to begin with, so like now I look relatively female. And when guys started to like comment and like be all the way that guys are, like then that's when it clicked in my head, like, oh, okay, so like I do like men.
And I know you said, but you were how old when you started to medically transition?
I was 21, so 21. It was about 2 years ago.
So you wouldn't have, at 21, you wouldn't have been started on hormone blockers. You just went straight to hormone treatment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am on testosterone blockers, but I wasn't on puberty blockers.
Right. When you mentioned Blanchard, these days, I mean, over the last couple of decades at least, Blanchard's name in the trans community and amongst trans activists is, it's kind of a dirty word in the community. And I'm just curious, how you discovered his work, and if you found it helpful, or what was your initial response to reading his typology and his description of AGP?
So I have said at various points that I didn't really come into contact with it very much when I was before I had transitioned. And for the most part, that's true. I think maybe I saw like a ContraPoints video about it, or like some like debunking of it on Tumblr or something, but it wasn't something that I really like took a lot of interest in or paid a lot of attention to, because I just figured that it was some, transphobic garbage or whatever. So I never really entertained it at all. So it wasn't really a thing when I was just like identifying as trans rather than actually having transitioned. But I came into contact with it in a more serious way about a year after I had transitioned, because I realized that, one, my dysphoria wasn't gone. It was lessened. It was definitely lessened, but it wasn't gone. And it was actually like moving into different parts of my body that hormones could not change. So I was like starting to get very dysphoric about like the size of my ribs or like the shape of my hands. And but it was like as intense as the fact that I didn't have breasts was, like, before I had transitioned. So I was like, okay, well then there's something missing here. And then I also started to question like okay, so I've transitioned, and I like, I don't know. There was just a lot. I don't know how to like explain the feelings that I was going through at the time, but I was just like, I don't like being trans, but I can't explain what the problem is. So I started to do a lot of research that was like super critical of trans stuff, and some of it was just very blatantly like quite vile. And then I came across Blanchard's theory, and I read basically everything there was to know about it. I read stuff from him. I read stuff from Michael J. Bailey. I read stuff from Anne Lawrence. I read stuff from Alice Drager. And I think Men Trapped in Men's Bodies was the point where I realized, okay, I am autogynephilic. And at first I really didn't want to believe it, just because like there are aspects of my life and my situation that did not match up with the typology that he had established in 1989. Like, I was younger and I was a little bit more feminine as a child, and I was things were, and at that point too, I was also like beginning to be androphilic. So I was like, okay, well, what is, this doesn't really make sense. I seem to straddle the typology or whatever. But then like reading Anne Lawrence's work put that into perspective for me. And I have to say that like that broke me out of the trans ideology headspace completely. But it also caused me to have like a severe mental breakdown that lasted like 2 or 3 months. This was back in May of this year, actually. I was horribly depressed after this happened, because it meant that everything that I had come to know about myself over the preceding like 6 or 7 years was totally wrong. And not only was it totally wrong, but like one of the things that was causing me to have suicidal thoughts was the fact that I looked like a man, or rather the fact that I was a man. And so now that for sure I am definitely a man, and that I really just have this weird fetish, that broke me pretty badly. And it left me like almost immediately I wanted to detransition after I started reading that, and especially after I started reading a lot of like radical feminist literature about this, and like Graham Linehan and who's the other guy, Rod Dreher, I think is his name. Like, I would read these like really horrible accounts of AGP, and I mean, part of this was also like, reasonable things that needed to be collected about men with AGP, like a lot of the crimes that they commit and a lot of the abuses that go on, and the kind of delusions that some of them experience. But I was also like, that was also like kind of the only literature about it, almost. Like, there wasn't very much that was positive about it. And even the spaces that were positive about it were kind of like, yeah, this is a progressive condition. You sort of always end up delusional. Like, there aren't a lot of good spaces with good literature about it. Some of them encourage transition because they think it will like at least alleviate the dysphoria, which is kind of the take that Blanchard has. But there are others that are just like, you need to suppress it completely. Then there are others that are just like, this is a moral flaw, like you're a complete deviant and, you know, XYZ. And I was just trying to like understand and try to figure out like what I should do, because I knew that the hormones were bad for me, like physically. I knew that they were quite destructive, but I like, even now I struggle with the thought of like coming off of them or like trying to change my lifestyle around. And I think that we can get into that a little bit later in the interview, but like for now, like the whole, like my whole discovery that like this was autogynephilia like was very destabilizing, very destabilizing, very, very difficult to trudge through. And I was kind of on my own, and I feel like I'm still kind of a little bit on my own.
I did have a similar, sorry, Aaron, I did have a similar experience. It just, and I think a lot of us do, you know, when that trans ideology shatters, it can be a very disorienting feeling, right? Because it feels like the whole ground comes out from under you. And so I can relate to that, how difficult that is. And I do have a fear, because I do think this narrative needs to be corrected, because I don't think we can continue to just lie to people about, and I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's sustainable. But I do have this fear that how many people are going to crash, you know, as we start to open up the conversation and talk about the different kinds of dysphoria and the, you know, the truth of our experiences. I do worry about, you know, I hope people are well supported through that realization. But once you kind of had that experience and got through that experience of that ground kind of falling out from under you, are you happy in hindsight that you now have the information about AGP? Do you think overall it's helpful for you, even though you had that initial kind of crash?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because otherwise I wouldn't have had an answer for what was wrong with me. And I would have still just been like, because like the first year I was really happy because I was like, okay, I'm finally gonna like grow up to be the woman that I thought I was gonna be. And then I realized like slowly over time, like being like in female spaces and like being treated as a female and you know, all these other things, like I realized like, okay, this is not what I thought it was. I'm still the same person on the inside. Even though hormones sort of changed my personality a little bit, like it not, you know, it's not like I'm a totally different person, but it's also like I also realized like I don't have quite as much in common with women as I thought I did. And I couldn't square sort of all the circles that were popping up around me with like, okay, well, you really are a woman. Because, you know, and then there was also the case that like one of the things I was really distraught about for a long time, and I'm still sort of sore about, is the fact that I cannot have children the way that a woman could. Like that was a very deep spiritual sort of wound, and that's not related directly to like any sort of fetish I have. It's not like I have a birthing fetish or whatever. It's just that like, because I thought I would grow up to be a woman, this aspect of a woman's life is not something I can ever have or ever do. And even if it were surgically available, I don't think I would ever have any interest in that. So it's like, you know, I am grateful that I now know that this is just really just a fantasy, and I don't know what causes it. I don't know why it happened, but it happened. And having that answer, knowing now, I feel like I can better arrange my life from here on out, because I still have like a lot of it left to live.
One thing that's kind of difficult that I imagine would be difficult. I had a similar experience that you've explained, and Aaron did it as well a bit. Is like when the ground falls out from underneath you, when you kind of wake up to the ideology of it all. But I feel like it's easier. It would have been easier for in Aaron and I's experience, because we weren't then inundated with all of this the anti-AGP rhetoric had to be just absolutely crushing, on top of having to have this realization that your kind of self-conception was false, and that you'd kind of been living this lie. And then it's like, oh, well, what I really am is apparently just reviled by the I want to see the opposition. But like in, say, gender critical spaces. I mean, did you encounter much of that, or like when you were reading that kind of the people who seem to be aware of AGP and talking about AGP are very I'm sure like quite hostile and critical about it. What was that experience like?
That was actually very crushing, and I still sort of have a difficult time processing that emotionally, just because like every instance of it that I would see on Twitter, and I did do like quite a lot of my research on Twitter just because I knew like Blanchard was there and like a couple of other figures were, almost every instance was like attached to some like horrible act of abuse, or like just like totally deranged like trans person that like even when I was like myself like a trans activist, I was like I would distance myself from them. Like to know that I shared that in common with them, like not only did I share that in common with them, at some points I was like believing that I had done like certain horrible things, especially the connection to pedophiles. Like that was something that kept coming up over and over, is that like autogynephiles are basically pedophiles. Like at a certain point I was like, am I, and because I have OCD, like that thought would just keep coming back like intrusively, like, who have I done all these awful things? Have I like coerced lesbians to have sex with me? Have I like etc. And like I had to like not only did I have to fight the thoughts about like destroying myself because I'm actually male, I would now also have to fight thoughts of like abuse I never actually committed, or like or like comparing myself to actual like violent criminals. And there were other things too, like, oh, AGPs are narcissists, AGPs are, et cetera, like especially what gets me all the time are like the rad femmes that are like claim to know what AGP is and not understand that it's like a pretty like broad descriptor for like a wide range of different behaviors. Like they like claim that it's all about like coercively getting people to validate you as a woman, even though like for some people, sure, but I mean not for me. But in that moment where I was like looking for answers, like, I was sort of trying to absorb as much information as I could, and a lot of that information, if not most of it, was sort of just like hateful. And some of it I understand, like even most of it I understand. Like I understand why there is that revulsion towards it, because a lot of the people that are delusional about their AGP, that are trans, they do end up doing really horrible things, and that was made clear to me just from all the all those sites that I visited. But there also was,
which is the harm of the ideology, largely, not just the AGP, right? I mean, when we have this trans ideology that just says, well, you just are a woman, and and it hides our actual individual experiences, it sort of does create a kind of delusional state, right? It's sort of like a group delusion imposed by the ideology, and I think that's exactly what's so hard when that bubble bursts for individuals like us. Why that's so hard? It is almost like snapping out of a delusional state. But I could really appreciate that, for you, that extra layer of, because on one extreme, we've got the TRAs who are saying trans is just trans and everything beautiful and colorful rainbows. And then on the other side, we've got, the radfems and the gender criticals tend to be the ones right now bringing up the science and Blanchard and the typology, but not always in a very positive or generous light, right? So I mean, our hope is to bring the conversation back to the middle, with compassion and nuance, to really understand these conditions in their breadth and depth. And that's one of the things I really loved about your article, which we'll link in the notes. It's not just about the sexual target location error. It's a lot of things, right? It's romantic love. It's it's multidimensional, and I that's one of the things that you really articulated well, I think, in that article.
One thing that I actually highlighted that I want to read, and obviously, yeah, the whole thing will be linked. But what you were saying, or what we kind of talking about with the kind of like you break out of it, and then you land in, from what was it, from the frying pan into the fire sort of situation. But you wrote, I'm just going to quote here, framing the discussion around AGP as being solely the purview of unadulterated perverts, craven narcissists, or rampant sexual abusers does a lot to demonize the growing ranks of men and boys who haven't actually done anything wrong, but have found themselves on the other end of a sex change without really understanding why. This will alienate them from polite society and lead them to seek comfort from circles that seek to abuse them. One of the things that I thought was incredibly powerful and important is like, where do we draw that line? Like, you want to on one hand, and I think you it was well in the article say you don't have a solution to this, you don't know the answer, but just drawing the point there that how do we on one hand talk about what's really going on, underneath the trans umbrella, how do we talk about that honestly without also just landing in a camp of demonization that then sends people back into the arms of either that ideology or just really dangerous online environments, which is obviously where most of this seems to be spawning.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I don't have an answer is because like there is this belief among certain gender criticals that just naming it as autogynephilia is going to keep people from transitioning, but the fact of the matter is just knowing you have autogynephilia is not necessarily going to keep you from wanting to transition. And I've been in a number of AGP online circles where they do something called pink pilling, which is where they push transition on people, and it's not like necessarily part of trans ideology, although part of it sort of gets like massaged in there, but it's more so like they're aware that they have this fetish, but that's not stopping them from trying to destroy other people's lives. Like it's not like they push transition as the solution for their AGP. Like it remains a solution for life's problems, even just knowing that you have it in the first place.
And you don't mean that in that, like we spoke to James Shoup about this as well, and he was basically treating his autogynephilia with transition in that the testosterone blockers and the estrogen basically diminished that paraphilic impulse, and so it was sort of a solution in that capacity. But you're not talking in that lens.
No. So the way that it turns out that I'm of the belief, and I know that there's like mixed literature on this, I'm of the belief that like blocking testosterone doesn't actually stop paraphilic impulses. I think what it really does is just reduces your sex drive overall. Okay. So what you're attracted to, you're still attracted to, even if it is a paraphilia, but right. It takes a lot more effort to make that anything, and I think in the case of Mr. Shoup, who I admire, I honestly do admire for everything that he said and everything he's been through too. It's really harrowing stuff. But like he has also said like he is a sex addict, and there are a lot of very notable autogynephiles who have admitted to being sex addicts as well. And while I think that for many autogynephiles, especially the ones that are sort of sequestered in their dorm rooms and everything, like porn addiction is a serious thing, but it doesn't seem that most of them are actually sex addicts. It seems that this is just like an embedded part of their sexuality, and they don't know how to like deal with it, and it doesn't really matter how they refrain from indulging it, like it's still there, and the way that these AGP circles tend to talk about transition fixing that, like part of it is about indulging the fantasy in the first place. So they sexualize the transition because a lot of them have like forced feminization fetishes. A lot of them watch a lot of sissy hypno porn, which was just wild when I found out what that was. So they have a lot of it is just kind of like they think that they can fix their lives by transitioning. Like they are kind of sort of in the same position that I was in when I came into contact with trans ideology. I thought that like if I could just like be a woman, then things would be so much better. And I would finally like not have to deal with this like constant desire. Like they're saying the same things, except they're using AGP as the excuse to transition. So even though they're right that like that's where it's coming from, it's not stopping them from doing it. And then there are others that are like, well, transition fixes it because then you don't have to deal with the constant, like, then it's kind of just a low level kind of, a really low level of libido. You don't have to think about it that much, but you do have to like blend in as a woman. And that's the hard part. And that's why some of them end up detransitioning, is because they can't keep up the appearance. Even though they actually like the blocking of testosterone. But then there are others that detransition because they don't like the blocking of testosterone and they like the fantasy more than the reality. So it's kind of a mix, but all the same, they're still like pushing it as like a solution for this. And sometimes it's as a solution, sometimes it's as a fetish, sometimes it's as everything, but it's there, it's very present.
Yeah, within these because as an outside, I've never been. I mean, I've like spent some time in like MTF on Reddit and whatnot, but that's about the extent of my my exposure to the male to female transition community. And as I understood it, that autogynephilia was outright denied as a reality and just a transphobic trope by this transphobic Dr. Blanchard, was how I thought that's how it was conceptualized, that while at the same time they do openly acknowledge, like, yes, I get an erection when I put on a skirt, so I have to take care of that, but like, they seemed, from my very shallow inundation to this, it seemed very much like, yeah, they would talk about there being an erotic component while at the same time kind of denying that autogynephilia is real. So you're saying that they actually use like that word autogynephilia or AGP is kind of openly spoken about as a real phenomenon, or is that not used and they're just kind of talking about, oh, how do you manage being sexually aroused by this?
It's real. So within MT like that RMTF circle thing, or anything that like talks about like trans, like if trans is the identity kind of group, any group like that, like they will deny autogynephilia outright, but they will talk about some of the same issues that men who know they have autogynephilia have. Like they will talk about, how do you reduce the dysphoria? How do you reduce the erection that you get when you're like wearing a skirt, etc. They will talk about those things while not using the word autogynephilia. But there are spaces online that acknowledge autogynephilia, that are aware that they have autogynephilia, that are aware that this is just a fetish and that it's very complicated, etc., etc. But they will still push transition. Yeah.
Do you feel like transition? Do you feel like you benefited from it at all?
That's a very mixed bag. I think I benefited from it because I wanted to. But I don't know how to, in some ways I benefited, in others I really, really didn't. The big thing with the main reason I feel ambivalent about why I transitioned is because I transitioned under really shady circumstances. I didn't get screened before anything. I just walked into an informed consent clinic and they gave me hormones. I wasn't intending to do that. I thought there would be some sort of process, and there wasn't. And I was kind of like, okay, I guess. But I mean, like, at around the same time I transitioned, there was a lot going wrong in my life. And the fact that I was going to transition was a huge motivation for me to jump over those hurdles and continue on with my life, even though I was dealing with a substantial amount of things. I had run away from home. I mean, I was an adult, but I was still like completely cut off from my parents for the first time. I had no real help from them. I was working full time and going to school full time. I was living with a cult, with a left-wing cult in college. It was not trans related, but it was like a leftist sort of dorm room cult. And I was in that toxic relationship I had mentioned. And I was morbidly obese. I had a lot of issues going on at the same time. And just the fact that I was like so close to transitioning, like once all that stuff started to like fall on top of each other, like my ex broke up with me and I got excommunicated from that cult and I had to find a new place to live. I ended up graduating from college by some miracle. Like once all that started to pass and I started transitioning, like it gave me a new lease on life. And then I ended up moving in with my grandparents because they were willing to take me in and they saw the kind of horrible state that I was in. And they encouraged me to like quit smoking weed and stop drinking and like start to exercise and take care of myself and everything like that. So I started to have a lot more of a supportive environment, and that coincided with my transition. So it's really hard to say how much transition helped me or not, because it came at the same time that a lot of good things were going on. I think it helped. I want to say I think it helped. But I also kind of wish I never did it. So it's iffy. I'm in a very weird place with it right now where I want to detransition for my health and so that I can like raise a family as like a normal guy and everything like that. But it's very hard to see that future for myself at this point, because it has been so long. I have dedicated like a third of my life to all of this, so it's gonna take some time, and I don't know, I don't know how to navigate personal relationships and stuff like that with regard to autogynephilia. Like part of me thinks it might just be easier if I just like end up with a guy who thinks, or not who thinks, but like who knows I'm a trans woman, who understands what like all of this means and everything, and I can just like continue to live my life as I have been without needing to like change back. But then there's also the health concerns, and I'm very much caught in the middle, and I have been caught in the middle since I found out about it. So I don't know, like it's helped me, but it's also, I think a lot of that was just like pure willpower.
One of the frustrations I have is how few clinicians even have an awareness of the typology and different kinds of gender dysphoria. Have you been able to find support
Um, sort of. I had a therapist that I recently stopped seeing. She was a gender therapist, and I introduced her to the literature on autogynephilia. And I also like sort of opened her eyes to like, okay, there's kind of a mass child transition thing going on, and it's not great. And so I did some work with her, but because I knew more about it than she did, she wasn't really able to help me out very much. Um, so I've been looking. I sent an email to a pretty experienced sex therapist in Australia who I've heard good things about. But last I heard, the waiting list was really long. So I'm willing to wait if it means that I can sort of figure out how to get out of this.
And this is all still relatively new to you, right? Like you kind of the as we said, the floor kind of fell out from underneath you just this past May. So we're talking like 6 months, right?
Yeah. It has been very new. But I haven't been doing, like, since COVID hit, I wasn't really doing much with my time anyway. So I just sort of obsessively consumed like all this material for like 10, 12, 14 hours a day. There were some days I just didn't sleep and I just kept reading about it because it was like, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. But yeah, it's new. It's definitely new. And I've been trying to explore my feelings about it, but I'm also trying to like sort of fast forward through it because I know that the longer I'm on T blockers, the more likely I will end up sterile. So I don't know. It's recent, so it's still kind of raw, but I'm also like, because I am like autistically obsessive about things, I was able to like absorb a lot in a very short period of time and synthesize my own sort of experience of it.
Aside from the supports that we as adults need, I'm always aware of the kids that are following in our footsteps. We've got a generation of kids now who are able to transition at a younger age than we could. What do you think you would want in place for this upcoming generation of people that maybe, boys that are going through something very similar to what you went through? What kinds of things would you want in place to better support them?
I have given this a lot of thought. And I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think it would be wise to have like counselors talk about AGP with boys they think might be at risk of it. I think talking about ROGD makes some sense, but even then, like, because like these things are spread through social contagion. I 100% believe that AGP can be spread through social contagion. I am kind of seeing that among certain groups of teens that are online, which is why I get worried about like the whole abuse angle, is just because like there are a number of boys who have transitioned as soon as they turned 18 that I'm friends with, that it seems that they were groomed online to do that. And I don't know if they would have done that themselves necessarily. So I don't really know. I think the thing is, I don't think that it's just about AGP. I think it's also just like about how we live now in general, like the internet. I do put a lot of the blame on the internet for why I ended up the way that I did. I don't think my gender dysphoria would have been nearly as bad if I wasn't aware that people could just transition. And I think about what's going to happen to the future generation a lot, partially because this started affecting me when I was like early in my teens. and partially because I don't know if I'm going to have kids, so I kind of want to do what I can to like protect the ones that people have already had, and because I'm in grad school to be a teacher right now, so like I'm already interacting with some students who are identifying as trans, and I don't really know, like I know legally what I'm allowed to do, and it's kind of horrifying that I'm not allowed to talk about it at all. But it's also just like I don't really know. I don't really know. I wish there was I've gone back and forth on it a lot. Like, should schools receive training and like understanding like the harms involved here? Should parents be talking to their kids more? Should etc. Like, I just don't know. And there are, and it's related to a lot of things too. Like, I think, you know, it's not just about AGP. I think it's also just about porn addiction and in general is affecting a lot of young people, including girls. I think there's a lot of like socially born mental concerns that I don't know. Like, I think this is bigger than just the trans issue, but I think the trans issue is where it's most visible because it's being pushed so hard.
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of layers have been added to the whole thing because of internet and just the easy access to online porn and the hypnotic sissy porn. I only just recently, within the last year, learned about.
Yeah, that was a big reason why I didn't think I was trans, is because like that was a big reason why I didn't think I was autogynephilic, is because like a lot of spaces talking about autogynephilia that were like support groups and stuff kept bringing it up, and there were like constant examples of it, and like I was sort of radicalized to think I was trans on Tumblr, so I was sort of like I was coming at it from like a sort of warped feminist perspective about like how men were bad and everything. Like I think that's why I was so dysphoric, is because I like, rather than simply fetishizing being a woman, I was more so hating the fact that I was a man in the first place, because I saw it as a I've described it on Twitter before as like a moral failure. But like a lot of these guys and a lot of the younger trans boys are sort of coming up on this sissy hypno porn and like all kinds of weird fetishy stuff, and it really took me aback. I was like, I don't think I'm an autogynephile then, if this is what the experience is like. But it turns out, like, you know, it is more than just one thing, you know.
It almost seems like the sissy hypno porn is like, you were talking about grooming. Are those kind of working in conjunction there? Do you think it almost seems like the sissy hypno porn is like a means of instilling an autogynephilic fetish into somebody versus an expression of it?
I think it is. I do think it is. And I think there are some like Instagram pages I've come across too, just because it ends up in my feed and whatever, of like crafting very esoteric arguments for why this is not simply a fetish and why they are real women and etc. And then I look at like the kinds of pages that follow it, and almost all of them tend to be teenage boys. And it turns this thing that could just be an erotic interest, even like it's covered in erotic imagery, so it is pornographic to a certain extent, but like the text overlaid on top of them are just like these super philosophical arguments for like deconstructing gender and blah blah blah. And I think that's also like a pipeline to transition, is just because it's like it's a very low level sort of horny thing, but it seems intellectual because there's all this text overlaid on top of it, and you start to like relate to it a lot, and you think you're absorbing information when mostly you're just absorbing the erotic content. And when I found out about that, when I found out about the sissy hypno porn, it does seem like it is grooming. And I don't think that everyone doing it is aware that they're grooming teenage boys to do it. I think they're just doing it for themselves, but don't realize that it's rippling out. But then there are also instances where, and I've seen this on the detrans subreddit, there was a packaging for a vial of estrogen that had like an anime girl on it that was trans, and the side of it said, "Caution, estrogen, keep out of reach of parents." And I realized this is, so there is like a pedophilia thing going on here too. Like they are grooming boys into this. And I mean, I realized it even when I was just in the spaces where I was like, how do I detransition? Does anyone have experience with this? And most of the comments were like, but you're so pretty, but you're only 23. Why would you want to detransition? And I was like, okay, I'll go somewhere else then. But yeah, no, I think it is a way of instilling it in people. And I can't think of a reason why, other than, the fact that they get off on the idea of doing that to other people.
Scary
I don't
thought.
want to like kind of I think there's a lot of talk about ascribing pedophilic intent to advocates of transition. You kind of have an entirely different perspective on this from what you saw online and stuff. But it seems to me like so much of the intention seems to be to validate adult transition and to kind of neutralize transition to be not sexual, and therefore if children are doing it, that nullifies any sexual component to it. You don't think that that's accurate from what you've seen, or what is your take on that?
I think both are true at the same time. I think the people that are trying to justify adult transition by saying, look at these kids that have dysphoria, like, I don't think that all of them are pedophile. I think they are just doing it for their reasons, but I think that allows the pedophiles a way in, I think they gravitate towards that because they're like, yeah, let's transition them, kind of thing. There are also, I also have to say, like, I don't think this is also just the purview of AGPs either. I've mentioned this a few times. There are people in the in an AGP support group that I'm in that is at least a little bit more conservative about how it treats transition, where there are men that I know that were transitioned as teenagers, but by trans support, like by people that support trans people, whatever. Some of them were social workers, some of them were therapists, and some of those social workers and therapists are known to have been sexual abusers, and those abusers were women. So it's very, like, I think it's one big thing. It's like a big tent of all kinds of different malicious manipulation, and some of it is not necessarily pedophilic, and some of them really do think that they're trying to do the right thing, and then others are just like, are abusers and are, I don't know. I think both are true.
Have you followed the work of Angus Fox at all, and his kind of research into what I guess would best be described as Rajdian boys?
I have not, actually. I have never heard that name before.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I recommend looking into the work that he's doing about the topic of kind of Lisa Lippman's work of rapid onset gender dysphoria, but primarily from the male to female perspective or experience. A lot of it, being quite erotica influenced, Anyway.
Yeah, he wrote a good article for Quillette, and he did an interview with Benjamin Boyce as well.
Yeah, and I did one on he did a good interview on heterodorks, and another one on He was on Gender: A Wider Lens as well. I'm not sure if Limpida, you're familiar with either of those podcasts. You sound more of a reader. I'm lazy and I like to listen, but yeah. I definitely recommend checking those out. Though, yeah, the work of Angus Fox is pretty enlightening in the male to female arena.
I'll definitely check it out. I'm surprised I haven't heard of him, considering I've heard of all those before. So
Okay.
I'll look into it. I'm very interested in like the ROGD model generally, because like when I was reading the Lisa Littman article, like so much of it sounded like my experience, but sort of reversed. And I was almost taken aback and a little bit offended when Blanchard like responded by saying like ROGD in boys isn't really a thing. It's like it's just all autogynephilia. And I think like, I mean, it is autogynephilia, but I don't think that that's any reason to say that like they're not experiencing rapid onset gender dysphoria, you know, like, because it's very clear, even just from his own research, that autogynephilia can create gender dysphoria. So, you know, yeah. So I will definitely check that out. Thank you for letting me know about him.
Yeah.
Just I'm curious about just your day-to-day life and your relationships with friends and family. Have you been well supported, and do they kind of understand some of the depth of what you're experiencing?
I don't think they understand, but they know that I'm going through a lot and that I've been going through a lot for a while. I think one of the things that transition actually did help with, as much as I wish that weren't the case, is my relationship with family. I sort of got welcomed back into the family very quickly after I transitioned, after kind of a very bitter break. So, but I've talked about it with them. I've talked about it with friends. I'm very open about it in my personal life about like what this is like, and people are supportive. Like people are generally very supportive. And I don't think they can understand unless they have it themselves. But no one said like this is a bad thing, or that it changes their like perspective of who I am and whatever, and they just kind of want me to do the best thing I can for me, but no one really knows how to help me, which I think is fair enough, because I don't know how to help myself. But yeah, no, I people are supportive and have been very they've listened to me rant about a lot of issues with like trans stuff and whatever, and most of them aren't even tuned into that at all. So I feel kind of very grateful for that. But it's not something that's on my mind 100% of the time. It comes and goes in waves, because I tend to like get sucked into certain subjects like really hardcore for a few weeks at a time, and it just so happens that trans stuff is one of those subjects. So I have been supported.
Yeah, it's interesting. We interviewed a couple episodes back a Canadian detransitioner by the name of Michelle, who also autistic, and was basically describing how she has those bouts of extreme obsession. I do as well. There's a lot of things that come up in this conversation that make me more and more realize I'm probably somewhere on the ASD spectrum, but that's beside the point. But she was saying how she there's just these topics that she would get fascinated with and obsessive about, and gender happened to be one of those. And then many years later, after she transitioned, she realized, oh, I'm just bored of this now. This was one of those things that was like a facet of extreme obsession and interest that kind of captivated her life for a few years. And then it was like, then when she snapped out of that obsessive interest, it was like, okay, well, now here I am. With the overlap with ASD conditions and transition, I wonder how much we're going to be seeing of that feeling.
I think it's overwhelming, honestly. I think the fact that I do go into these obsessive spirals, I think that that's what spurred this on in the first place. Because I mean, I had whatever, like latent autogynephilia, whatever. I seriously don't think it would have been as bad if there wasn't this wealth of bullshit information that was just available, and all this like emotional pandering and these like brain worms and what do you call them, cognito hazards that just like totally destroy every framework that you grew up learning. Like, if I and I am that kind of obsessive person, so this was something that I was like constantly going back to, no matter what part of my life I was in. And usually like this sort of self-reflection that would lead me to hate myself was during bouts where I was like already very upset over something. And the only soothing that I got in this, you know, like I had mentioned, this started when I was a child, like the only soothing place I could go to at the time was like pretending I was a girl. And my ex-girlfriend, who, you know, guided me into this, sort of, we went into it together, we like we both sort of inhabited this like fantasy world together, because she was also autistic. So we set up this like fantasy world where, like, you know, we would talk to each other in like baby voices to like make it real and whatnot. And that was also like sort of a delusional state and whatever. And it was complicated. It was very complicated, but you know, she was like that too. And she also had, like I had mentioned, like she had a bout of about a year where she thought she was going to transition to be a man. And one of the only reasons she didn't was because I was like, first of all, I'm not attracted to men, because at the time I wasn't. And second, like, you don't have to change anything. You're fine the way that you are. And eventually she's let go of that. You know, I never went the other way around, you know? So yeah. But I was also, I mean, I think part of it is also just that, like, even I think to some extent she had autoandrophilia. It seems like that might have been a factor at play. I can't really say for sure because we haven't talked in like 2 years or whatever. But she also like I think women's sexuality, especially with paraphilias, is a lot more fluid than it is for men. So I think she was able to snap herself out of it and like move on to other things, and I wasn't. And I think that's just based like a serious biological difference between the two of them. And this comes up in the AGP group that I'm in now sometimes too, where we talk about the differences between the autosexualities that present in women and the autosexualities that present in men. And most of the time, like, women are able to desist from that, and men kind of aren't. And their paraphilias are sort of much more ingrained and compulsive than they would be for women. And I don't know why that happens, but it seems like it does.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some evidence of more fluidity in female sexual orientation in general. You know, even the fact that so many FTMs, once they transition, their sexual orientation flips, and maybe they had been always attracted to women and then suddenly they're attracted to men, or in the opposite direction. And I don't hear that happening as much with MTFs.
I mean, the flip definitely happened for me. It was very jarring. I spent quite a lot of time like quite upset over it, actually, because like I had made it part of my identity, as cringy as it sounds. Like, I was a transbian for a bit. But part of why I felt ashamed about that at a certain point was also because like the relationship I was in was like LARPing as a lesbian, and like it was like sort of unspoken between the two of us that attraction to men was like a morally repugnant thing almost. So I felt like I couldn't really share that very much. I don't know. And also just like with friends in general, it felt strange to suddenly be like, oh, well, I kind of want a boyfriend now, even though, you know, I don't know. But that was a very jarring thing. And I only realized it once, like, guys started giving me attention. And that's how I knew it was like not the same as my attraction to women, because my attraction to women is more like holistic. But with men, it very much is related to how they perceive me. And I don't know how to like square that circle, but since that switch has happened, like it's been very persistent. Like it hasn't gone away, and at certain points it's been even like stronger than my base attraction to women. And sometimes I'm even like reviled by not reviled, but like I have a revulsion to women, and that's also been something very difficult to deal with. And I don't know how I would handle detransition with it, because I have been thinking about like settling down with a man, and instead, because I don't know, like if I had a female partner, like some part of me realizes like I would try to imitate her. And that sort of happens subconsciously, because that happened subconsciously with every woman that I've been with. And yeah, I don't know that I would want to do that. Whereas with a man, I wouldn't have to do that at all. So it's a very complicated thing. Like that's sort of why I'm like, on the fence about all of this. And I don't know what the future is going to bring. But it has that flip did happen for me, and I have heard it happen to other trans people. One of the friends that I have that was, I don't think we're friends anymore, but like MTF, she also experienced this, but at the same time, she also realizes she's not actually attracted to men, but doesn't know how to explain what is going on. And I tried to tell her, and she was like, autogynephilia is fake. So.
But what you're describing, isn't that what I think you referred to it as meta, or more commonly known as pseudo-bisexuality, where your attraction to men is not about them, it's about them validating you as a woman, correct?
Yeah.
So I think that base attraction still remains the same, being yourself as a woman.
Yeah. But it's gotten more complicated over the past few months, because like it's not just about that anymore. Like there is a level of physical attraction now that wasn't there before, and I don't know how to explain. And not only that, but there's like serious romantic attraction too. Like that's sort of the main crux of it, actually, is like a romantic sort of attraction to men. And it is still meta attraction, but it behaves as if it were like a normal sort of attraction, which is another reason why I sort of denied having autogynephilia, or not denied, but like didn't want to believe I had autogynephilia, because I was like, but it feels so real. And that's because, I mean, it sort of is, like it is, but it isn't. And at least when it comes to my attraction to men, it might be complicated, but it's somehow a little less complicated than my attraction to women, because part of my attraction to women like involves trying to imitate them.
Yeah, I had a similar experience that I had once I kind of came to understand what autogynephilia was. I did kind of try to associate it with myself, and just it doesn't really apply, because the whole as we said, male and female sexualities are very different. But previous to transitioning, I always when I would look at men, there was the intersection of envy and attraction. It was the same thing. That was the same feeling. Whereas women they were just revolting to me sexually. And then once I transitioned, that orientation shifted. I no longer. Well, I used to like pre-transition. I used to always. I didn't compare myself to women as women normally do. Like I compared myself to men, and then so obviously my physicality was always not lining up. But then post-transition, I no longer did that. I was much more sexually attracted to females than males. And then when I found out about pseudo-bisexuality, I was like, oh shit, is that what's going on for me as well? But I realized my attraction to women, I'm completely neutral in it. It's not It really has nothing to do with me. It's entirely target oriented, I guess, which is probably the testosterone more than my natal brain. But anyway, it's just interesting to compare that, the female and male transition experience there.
Yeah, what you said about like comparing yourself to other to like men instead of women, like I did that too in high school. I most of my friends were girls in high school, and most of my friends are still girls now. And part of it is also because my autism, like I'm a highly sensitive person, is what some of the literature calls it. So, like, there are there are things that I talk about because I take in so much of my environment that only girls sort of understand how to talk about it, but like guys don't, because I don't know. And that's been heightened since I transitioned. I think estrogen does play sort of a role in that a little bit, but it's still not one-to-one. But at any rate, like I didn't really understand men's sexuality at all. And when I was comparing myself to other people, I really was not comparing myself to boys at all. I just wanted to distance myself from them entirely. And I was more so comparing myself to other girls. And I think that's also why I developed anorexia a little bit. Because like when I was young, I was getting bullied by boys. And then when I got older, I was starting to get bullied by girls. And it's different. It's different, you know? And I genuinely was like comparing myself to girls. And I think that was also a big factor in the dysphoria, is because I was like, why don't I look like them? Like, why can't I look like them? Like, what is going on? And that's also a big reason why I didn't think I had autogynephilia too, is because like I didn't associate sexual feelings with that. Like there was envy, and there was like a mix of envy and attraction, but I didn't associate any sort of sexual feelings with the thought of like looking like them necessarily. I just thought that I looked like an ugly girl, kind of. And didn't understand why my figure wasn't coming in. Why wasn't I like growing breasts? Like what the hell was, so even though like I knew I was male at that point. So yeah.
So complicated. There's always so many layers.
And it is, that's also why it's hard to say, like, did transition help me? Because like, honestly, like to that extent it did. And I was able to like wear clothes I was actually comfortable in. And I was also not a transvestic fetishist. So I didn't really like, it wasn't arousing to me to put on women's clothes. The only times I ever did that sexually were because my partner wanted to do that with me. Wasn't something I would do normally. And like, I don't know, like, but then for other autogynephiles, like it's a very big part of it. And, like for a lot of them, like some people who end up transitioning are literally just like transvestic fetishists, and they could have been fine if they just like kept that in the bedroom. But now because of trans ideology, like they think that means something else. But for me, like the thought of being a woman was a much more metaphysical thing. Like it was much more like I wanted the whole life of a woman, and it wasn't relegated just to sexuality. It wasn't relegated just to stuff I would do in the bedroom. Like it really was like a whole, like I wanted the whole experience, everything about it. Like even just the whole, like even just the bad stuff, even the trade-offs, everything. Like because I almost couldn't conceive of myself as male. And now that I know where that comes from, I have some solace in knowing I am actually male, but I still like, there's still this like totalizing desire that I'm not sure is ever going to go away.
Are you familiar with Blanchard's 4 types of autogynephilic, where it's behavioral, anatomical, physiological? Do you think that applies here? Yeah.
I think it does. I think there are some things that do and others that don't. It sort of was a progressive thing for me. Like it sort of happened in chunks over time. And I think part of that was because there was this sort of like sexual influence involved with like my ex and everything. Not to blame everything on her, obviously, but it was there. There was some pressures there. I I think it applies, but I also think people straddle the categories. I think there's I also think there are a lot of different expressions of autogynephilia that aren't necessarily fully encapsulated by the subtypes. I think that framework is helpful, but I also don't think that the conclusions that he comes to necessarily mean surgery and hormones are the best thing for people who have anatomic autogynephilia. I had anatomic autogynephilia for a long time. Like that was the sexual aspect of it, and it was quite jarring because I felt like completely disconnected from my own genitalia. And I had pondered, surgery. I thought, and at certain points, like my therapists were like, "Well, why don't you, sign yourself up for this? Like when you try to do your research about it." And the reason I was so like not on board with it was because like first of all I knew it wasn't actually a vagina, and second of all like it doesn't turn out well a lot of the time. So I was like not on board with that, but I think one of the issues with Blanchard and his whole take on it, and I don't know about like how his patients have gone or anything. I don't want to say that he's doing any sort of malpractice. Like that's definitely not what I'm saying. But I think that some of the arguments that he makes on Twitter sometimes are like, if you have the right subtype of autogynephilia, then that necessitates that you alter your body. But I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that's a much more like individuated thing. And I think he would probably agree with me on that. But I don't think that the subtype alone dictates whether surgery and hormones is a good idea for you.
I think he was also seeing, back, 30, 40 years ago, he was seeing a different cohort, more extreme, and what you probably refer to as like either autogynephilia that's progressed as it typically does, into middle age and beyond, or like the sex addicts you were referring to. So it's going to be more intense and pronounced in those demographics than in your case, which is probably more along the lines of the younger, Rajni cohort who get more experience to this, like have little, it's less intense innately, but it's just kind of magnified by the online culture that we're all stewed in now. So I think it's going to be different presentations now versus then.
Yeah, I think so too. And I do think that as well. I worry about what it's going to look like in the future for me and others like me. I don't know how it's going to progress from here. It kind of feels like it's stopped in its tracks almost for me, knowing it, like having a name for it and like knowing how to like control certain aspects of it now. But I don't know, I don't know how it's going to change. Like I don't have any sort of anatomic autogynephilia anymore other than the parts that I actually have now. So like that's, I've made my peace with the fact that I will never actually like get to experience the life of a woman. And that's like fine with me, but I don't know what will happen in the future. I don't know how things are going to change. I don't know how detransition will affect me. I don't, none of this. I don't know how it's going to, I also especially don't know how it's going to affect people that like can't get away from online or are going to like live under lockdown for like with the COVID thing. Like that's what scares me, not to, get too political about that, but like all the lockdowns, and I don't know how long that's going to last. And I think that it's going to have some very lasting impacts on people in general. I think we're going to see the emergence of a lot more extreme fetishes from people that didn't previously have them just because they've been cooped up for so long with only their laptop. It's very concerning.
Yeah, that is. That is. On a brighter note, I did hear from the I think it was during the Rajni conference yesterday. I can't remember who said it, or maybe I'm even misplacing where this came from. Um, but people had reported that a lot of the rapid onset gender dysphoric girls actually started desisting once removed from their like high school social groups and whatnot, and just kind of like out taken away from that social group that may have initiated that trans identification. And so I guess, yeah, it could work in different directions. If it's more socially motivated and an immediate, actual physical social peer group, being removed from that, could result in desisting, or yeah, like you're saying, being cooped up with just online social spheres and pornography and whatnot could create whole new issues.
Yeah, I'm grateful that's working out though. The like removing from the social contagion group. I'm glad that it's as simple as that for some people, because that does actually give me some hope that this is gonna blow over.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us about this. It's been very illuminating. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful I was able to share my experience with you guys.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Transparency Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please help out our algorithm by hitting like or subscribe. If you'd like to make a donation, follow the link to our PayPal account. On behalf of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, thanks for your support.